Hello, my name is Keith Lybrand. I'm the youth pastor or associate pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in Henderson. I've been asked to do some studies on youth ministry, and I thought probably the best way to start would be, I titled this little short lesson called Ministering to Teenagers from a 30-year youth pastor. So I'm going to give you a little more about my background, and I want to explain a little bit about youth ministry and how it's changed over the years since I started. And I will say that I may hit on something that you're still doing, and it might work where you're at, but I will say that sometimes churches are still trying to minister to youth in a way that we were probably doing it 20 years ago, and they're struggling with it. So if that is the case, maybe something that I say or do will help you rethink the way you're doing things. So I started working with teenagers in 1988. We won't talk about how long ago that is, but back then we were youth directors. That's what we were called. I was in a small country church, and as small as the church was, we had 50 teenagers in that youth group. There were a lot of kids. And what I learned really quickly, especially in that, is kids weren't too concerned about spiritual stuff. They weren't bad kids. What they really wanted is to hang out with their friends. And basically anything I did or we did as a staff working with those students, anything that we did involved food, involved hanging out, involved playing basketball or any kind of fellowship. Literally every kid in that youth group would show up. If we played football on Sunday afternoon, every boy in the youth group was there. If we got together and we watched fireworks at somebody's house, every kid in the youth group was there. They came to everything if there was something going on. And I was there for a few years. In 1991, I began my first full-time youth ministry job, and my title there was youth director again. I think my actual title was assistant to the pastor. They were not calling us youth pastors yet. And I found that when I got to that place, it was a larger city, it was a bigger church, and things were different. And I don't know if it was different because kids had changed or if it was different because it was a different culture. And I'm going to tell you that what I began to learn really quickly is the culture of where you live is very important to how you do ministry. You have to be aware of what's going on where you live and how kids are responding where you live. There are certain things that never change about kids, such as they need to feel accepted, they need to feel loved, they need to feel like they belong. These things are always the same. But as far as what they want to do and what it needs to look like, that can be very different depending on where you're at. At that bigger church in the larger city, that hangout aspect of ministry where church would let out at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night and they would sit in the parking lot till midnight just sitting in cars hanging out, that was gone. They weren't doing that. This ministry at the larger church was much more program based. We were doing several different types of programs. I had fellowships a couple times a month in our multi-purpose building, and we did pizza and we did games, and it was all organized. We went to camp and we did amusement parks and bowling and trips. I will say that church was still the hub of the activities of most of those kids. My next church that I went to was in 1993, and this was completely different. I moved to Los Angeles, California, and I will tell you, church was incredibly different there. What was unique about that experience is that when I arrived at that church at Bellflower, there were like 30 teens in the church, but there were only like 5 that were faithful. And so I had a lot of teenagers that were kind of there Sunday morning or something, but as far as faithful that were going to stuff and attending, it was a very small number. So I was faced with figuring out the culture because I wasn't from there, and then I had to figure out how to take these 5 kids and grow it into something more than 5 kids. I did a number of activities with that group. We had hang time on Friday night from my house where we played tag football in the parking lot. We did lock-ins. We played laser tag in the church. I know none of y'all would want to do that. We played basketball after school. I had a program. We did retreats. We started mission trips. I had, at one point, half my youth group was doing drama, so we started doing drama mission trips because I had so many kids that were into acting. It seemed like I needed to tap into that. I created my own youth program for the very first time on that, and we went in a year from 5 faithful kids to about 65 faithful kids. And it was just a matter of building a team, pouring in. We did praise and worship for the first time, and everything at that point, it was based around me and college students. I had college students help me. I didn't have a ton of adults that were engaged. I had some that were very faithfully engaged, but I had a lot of younger people that helped me. When I moved to Texas in 2001 to Calvary, everything was different then. It was a little bit larger church, and they had had some very successful youth ministries when I got there. And this first summer I was there, though, we got down to 12. We had a couple nights where we had 12 kids at night, which the ministry now is way, way larger than that. At Calvary is the first time I was called a youth pastor. I had a team of adults that did everything, and this was kind of new for me because in the past I did everything and I had a few helpers, and here I was more an administrator with a whole bunch. I had so many adults that wanted to help and be a part of things. The day of that activity-based youth ministry where we were running and going and doing arcades and playing, that day was over. Kids were much busier. They didn't have near as much time to do that stuff, and I will say that if you're still trying to do a whole ton of just activities to have activities so that they can connect, you're probably spinning your wheels unless you're in a very different place than I'm at, because kids, they'll attend, but I might get half of them at something like that. You know, I'm never going to get everybody. We went from a low of running 12 to 135 at the peak on a Wednesday night, high schoolers. I no longer did the monthly fellowships. I did what I would call more very significant events like camp, Disciple Now Weekend, conferences, retreats. I did fewer things, but I did larger, more significant things. And so it was easier for them to commit to going to a retreat for a weekend as long as they weren't happening a lot. People's money's a little bit tighter. So I think that what I tried to do is really figure out what worked. In my town, Wednesday night was huge. Most students went to church on Wednesday night. It was a big youth night. Every church in town had a huge youth night on Wednesday night, so I put a lot of eggs in that basket, and we really focused on having a great Wednesday night thing. Sunday night for our church was a great night where it was just mainly church kids. It was parents who were faithfully attending on every service. Wednesday night was I've called it my door into the youth group, because that's where we have all of our visits. We did mission trips. It was at Calvary that I used to, when I would do a mission trip, I'd plan a bunch of fun stuff like amusement parks and all that kind of stuff, and we'd mission trip for a day or two, and then we'd do a bunch of fun. I eliminated all the amusement parks, and I made mission trips. We focused on doing whatever thing we were doing. What I've learned is, as I try to minister today, as I mentioned earlier, kids in the past just wanted to hang out. They wanted as many activities as possible. It was a social connection. It was their primary social connection. And today, in 2020, it's not that way. Today, in 2020, kids are extremely busy. They don't care about social connection. I remember a few years ago, my son, it was a Friday night, and he was in his room and he was playing Xbox. He's a junior in high school, and my wife is like, why is he in there? When we were kids, we were running around and doing stuff, and I remember telling her, he's in there on that Xbox with 5 of his closest friends, and they're talking through headsets, and that is their connection. They're doing that every night of the week. They're doing it on their phones. They're doing it on their headsets. They are connected with their friends. It just doesn't look like it did when we were young, because they don't have time to get in a car and go and sit and do. Now, they'll do some of that depending on where you're at, but you got to understand that connection is different. Will I ever have my entire youth group at anything? The answer is probably no. Another new thing is most kids are coming from a split home. And I have probably a fourth of my youth group that they're only at church every other week. And that's a new thing. I can remember back in the early days when I did youth ministry, if I didn't have everybody, I'm beating myself up. Why wasn't Bobby here? Why wasn't Susie here? But you're going to have to get to a point where you just accept. We do a huge event called Disciple Now Weekend, and with that event, we try to plan it around school stuff, and no matter how much I try to plan it, I'm going to have 5 to 10 kids out. I'm going to miss 5 or 10 kids for camp. Every year at camp, I have drill team camp going on, or some of them are playing football practice or something. It's always something, so you got to just accept. You get as many as possible, but you won't have everybody. I have to connect with parents as much as I do kids in 2020. Parents want to know me. They want to know that I got my head on straight. They want to know that it's safe. I go to ball games and watch my kids play, and that's another thing. You have to go to them as much as you expect them to come to you. And I'll go to these ball games, and the first thing I do is it's like going to church on Sunday morning. I look for the people I know, and I'll go sit with Bobby's mom and dad while he plays, and then I may stay for 3 or 4 games. I'll go sit over here with Susie's parents, and then if there's 2 kids playing, I may sit with one half, the other, and I visit with those parents. While I'm at the game, it excites the kids to see me, but I'm there to connect with their folks, because if they trust me, they will encourage their kids to come to stuff. This is the first time I've ever been in ministry where kids' parents are excited sometimes when they don't go to stuff because they don't have to mess with it and they don't have to pay for it. It's very interesting. Money's important. If you've got a family with 3 or 4 kids in your church and you go to Six Flags and it's $30 a kid, well, you think, man, that's $100 for that family, not counting whatever they eat. One thing I've started trying to do is pay for, if they've got multiple family members like that, I might only make them pay for one, and I try to get money to pay for the other kids so that the families feel like we're loving on them and helping them. Substance is a huge thing today. Kids do not want to waste their time. They don't have a lot of time. If church feels like a waste of time, and remember, playing a bunch of social games is only going to keep them for a second. They want substance. They want to go there. They want to feel like it matters. They want to feel like they're getting something they're not getting anywhere else. And so if you do not provide substance in a way that they relate to, you're wasting your time because you're wasting their time, and they just won't come. Kids need to be loved by adults that are not their parents. Kids, a lot of times, a lot of our kids, and it's no bash on parents, are coming from divorced families, broken homes. Some of them have dads in their life, some of them don't, some of them their mom, whatever the situation is. It is very important for kids to be connected with other adults that love them in a safe environment where they get another set of folks that care about them. We used to hire youth pastors because they were young and they were exciting and they had the spiky hair and they, did all the fun stuff. But the truth is, kids don't need a play partner. They need another adult that gives them wise advice and loves on them. They don't need you to be their friend. They don't need you to be one of them. And I go to a youth pastors conference every year. It's nothing but youth pastors, and I've been doing this for about 20 years. And I noticed the last few years that I go to youth pastors, I'm a 54-year-old youth pastor. I am not one of a kind at those meetings. I will say that the average age of those youth pastors in those meetings are 40 and up now. There are still some of those younger guys, but I will tell you, in the larger churches with the bigger youth groups, it's older guys. And churches are looking for somebody who's got their act together and somebody who knows what to do, which brings me to the last thing. If I can tell you about ministering to kids, 30 years of experience, you got to watch yourself and be smart. In this day and age, you need to practice smart practices in youth ministry. And that means, you don't get in a car and haul teens around by yourself. It means that you make sure you have workers with you. If you're a male youth pastor and you're doing a trip and you have 10 kids in the van, you make sure you have an adult female in the van with you. It means that you watch how you touch kids, you watch how you talk to kids, you watch what you say to kids. You need to be wise, because if you are not wise, you will mess yourself up and you will mess the church up. Youth ministry is alive and well in 2020. It still works, it's still viable, but it's not the same as it was when you were a kid. And if you were trying to do it like it was done when you were a kid, you're probably struggling with it. So you've got to make these adjustments. Thank you guys for listening.